At 79, Warren Beatty finally broke his silence. During a quiet interview meant to honor his decades in cinema, a single question changed the air in the room. Someone asked if he had ever truly been in love with Diane Keaton. The man who had spent a lifetime deflecting emotion suddenly paused. His eyes softened, and he whispered, "Yes, I did love her." The world froze. Two legends, Warren Beatty, Hollywood's eternal seducer, and Diane Keaton, the woman who made awkwardness look like art, had once shared something the public never knew. A brief affair. Born on the set of Reds, burned with brilliance, then vanished into silence. On screen, they were magic, two minds drawn together by the same hunger for truth, the same obsession with perfection. But behind the camera, their love was not a fairy tale. It was a duel between two egos too proud to surrender. He was addicted to conquest. She was terrified of being conquered. Their chemistry became both a spark and a wound. For decades, neither spoke about what truly happened during those months of filming, the long nights rewriting scripts, the glances that lasted too long, the letters that were never sent. The world saw the film. They lived the tension. Now, at an age when most legends fade into nostalgia, Warren Beatty's confession has reopened a chapter long buried under red carpets and applause. The story of two icons who met at the right time but in the wrong way. Because some loves do not end. They simply turn into silence. So what really happened between them? Was it love? Or was it the price two artists had to pay for greatness? In the early 1980 seconds, Hollywood was a kingdom of glamour built on smoke and mirrors. And in that glittering kingdom, Warren Beatty was its most magnetic king. He was the man every actor wanted to be, and every woman wanted to save handsome. Intelligent, infuriatingly charming. A filmmaker with the power to turn his obsessions into art. Reds was supposed to be his masterpiece. A film about passion, revolution, and sacrifice. But behind the political metaphors and poetic frames, another revolution was quietly happening, one inside his heart. When Diane Keaton entered the project, she carried with her the ghost of Annie Hall, that blend of vulnerability and wit that made audiences fall in love without understanding why. She was eccentric, intuitive, difficult to categorize. The kind of woman who could be both fragile and fearless in the same breath. Beatty, notorious for never settling, found in her a mirror he didn't expect, someone who didn't need him. On set, the connection was immediate but disguised beneath professionalism. They talked endlessly about scenes, rhythm, silence, the meaning of truth and art. He admired her refusal to flatter, the way she questioned everything, even his authority. She admired his brilliance but feared the chaos it carried. He was like lightning, she would later say. Beautiful from a distance, dangerous up close. The public saw only the surface, two geniuses shaping a cinematic epic together. The press called them the perfect artistic duo, the visionary director and the muse who gave his ideas a soul. Every photograph from that period radiated confidence. Beatty, dark-suited and commanding. Keaton, luminous in her eccentric hats and quiet smile. But what those photos never showed were the late nights when they stayed behind after the crew had left, arguing not about the script, but about the blurred line between the characters they played and the emotions they were starting to feel. Their relationship unfolded like a secret rehearsal. He would bring her coffee at dawn, just before shooting, quoting lines from Reed's letters to Louise Bryant, lines that seemed to belong as much to them as to their characters. She would laugh it off, pretending not to understand, then later find the same words written in the margins of her script. His handwriting unmistakable. For Beatty, Diane was different. She didn't orbit around his fame. She questioned him, mocked him, saw through him. For a man who built his identity on control, she was both fascination and threat. She made him vulnerable, a state he both desired and feared. She had this ability to make silence feel like an answer. One crew member remembered. He would stop talking mid-sentence, just watching her think. But Keaton, despite her affection, knew herself too well. She had lived through the storms of Woody Allen, understood the cost of loving a man who lived entirely through his art. Beatty, to her, was another kind of danger, not moral, but emotional. The kind that could swallow her completely. In her journals, she once described him as the sun I could never touch without burning. As the filming of Reds reached its peak, so did the tension between them. Every scene became an echo of their unspoken feelings. The intensity they brought to the screen, the longing, the anger, the tenderness came from something real. The film's love story mirrored their own, and neither could tell where fiction ended. To the outside world, it was perfection. When Reds premiered in 1981, critics called it a triumph. Beatty won the Oscar for Best Director. Keaton's performance was hailed as one of her finest. They stood side by side at award ceremonies, their chemistry undeniable. But behind that glow was the beginning of their quiet collapse. The problem with perfection is that it demands to be preserved, even when the truth begins to rot beneath it. Warren, ever the perfectionist, began to demand more control not just over the film, but over the fragile bond between them. Diane withdrew, sensing the pattern she had seen before, the artist who could give everything to his work but nothing to the person beside him. During one late-night edit session, she reportedly told him, "You don't love people, Warren. You love what they make you feel." He didn't deny it. He simply looked at her, eyes tired, and said, "Maybe that's all I know how to do." Their collaboration ended, but the silence between them lingered. They didn't have a public breakup. There was no dramatic fight, no scandal for tabloids. Just a gradual fading, two constellations drifting apart in the same sky. For years afterward, Beatty would mention her name carefully, as if handling glass. He dated others, married later, became a father, but those who knew him said Diane remained the exception, the woman who had seen him without his armor. And Diane, she carried him like a quiet ache, a reminder that even legends have moments they never fully recover from. When asked once if she regretted the relationship, she smiled and said, "No. Some stories don't need endings. They just need to be remembered." What the world saw was a perfect image, two icons, two geniuses, two stars whose paths crossed at the height of their light. What the world didn't see was what perfection cost them, the sleepless nights, the pride that kept them apart, and the love letters that never found their destination. Because the truth is, sometimes love is not about possession. It's about recognition the moment one soul quietly tells another, "I see you." Fame has a strange way of amplifying silence. After Reds ended, the world moved on. But Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton carried the aftermath like a quiet wound that refused to close. In public, they smiled, two professionals honoring a masterpiece. In private, they were ghosts orbiting each other's memories. There were no scandals, no photographs of tears or shouting, only a trail of interviews filled with polite sentences and carefully chosen words. "We had a wonderful collaboration," Keaton would say. "He's a remarkable man." Beatty, when asked about her, would smile and add softly, "Diane was unique. There's nobody like her." But every word sounded like a confession that had arrived too late. I am Ard. The falling silence. It began with small distances, phone calls that grew shorter, dinners postponed, letters unsent. Diane, who once spent nights in his editing room watching him obsess over a single frame, now avoided those spaces entirely. She had seen that kind of hunger before, a man consumed by the illusion of control, believing that perfection could protect him from pain. And Beatty, though he'd never admit it, was afraid. Afraid that Diane had seen the real him, the restless boy beneath the legend. The man terrified of stillness. All his life, he had been surrounded by people who adored the image, not the person. But Diane saw through the armor, through the charm. She saw the loneliness behind it. She had that look. He once told a friend, like she was reading the last page of a book you didn't know she'd already finished. Every time he called her, he rehearsed silence. Every time she laughed, he heard the echo of something slipping away. I am. The letters that never left. Years later, in an interview that never aired, one of Beatty's longtime editors confessed that Warren had once asked him to destroy a stack of handwritten notes. They were letters to Diane, he said quietly. But they were never mailed. No one knows what those letters contained, but fragments survived a few lines found in Beatty's archive decades later. You make chaos look like grace. I wanted to film you the way the world sees light for the first time. I thought I could direct love, but love doesn't take direction. Each sentence was both apology and confession, a man trying to rewrite his own past, as if language could undo time. For Diane, the silence was her shield. She had spent years being someone's muse Woody's, Al S., Warren's. Now, she wanted to belong to herself. In her journal, she wrote, "Men like Warren believe love is a performance. But I don't want an audience anymore. I want quiet." 2. I am. The distance of years. Hollywood, ever hungry for legends, kept trying to pull them back together. At award ceremonies, their names were still linked, Beatty and Keaton, the golden duo of Reds. When they occasionally crossed paths, a charity event, a studio dinner, they exchanged polite smiles. But those who were close enough to watch saw something else in their eyes, a tremor, a recognition of everything left unsaid. There was one night, years after Reds, that friends still talk about. It was 1992, at a private party celebrating Keaton's success in Father of the Bride. Beatty arrived unexpectedly. He had aged, still handsome, but softer, quieter. Diane was radiant and white, her laughter echoing through the room. When their eyes met, time folded in on itself. For a moment, it was as if the lights, the cameras, the years all disappeared. He walked over. She smiled. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she replied. Then came the pause, that old, familiar pause filled with everything they could have been. Later that night, she would tell a friend, "It's strange. You can still feel something, even after you've forgiven it." IV. 2 mirrors. What neither of them could escape was that they were mirrors, reflections of each other's, contradictions. Both perfectionists. Both vulnerable. Both afraid of disappearing. Beatty's life became a long corridor of success films, accolades, headlines. Yet behind every triumph, he chased something invisible, the validation that art could never give. Keaton, meanwhile, grew into the quiet, eccentric she was born to be, collecting memories instead of people, building a home filled with books, photographs, and silences she no longer feared. He married Annette Bening. She congratulated him through mutual friends, though she never wrote directly. It wasn't bitterness, it was acceptance. Because some stories are not meant to be rewritten, they are meant to be remembered as they were brief, intense, unfinished. And yet, even as Beatty built a family, Keaton's name lingered like an aftertaste in his interviews. When asked about the women who influenced him most, he hesitated before answering. Diane taught me that love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes it just visits to remind you who you are. V. The Last Scene. In 2016, at the Academy's tribute to Reds, the two were invited to speak together again after decades. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. And there they were, two aging legends framed by nostalgia. Beatty took the microphone first. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of emotion he couldn't quite conceal. He spoke about the difficulty of making the film, the passion of the cast, the madness of chasing a dream. Then, without looking at her, he added, "I wouldn't have survived it without Diane." Keaton smiled, half amused, half trembling. When it was her turn, she leaned toward the mic and said, "He drove me crazy, but he also made me fearless." The audience laughed, but between them, something flickered that old warmth, fragile yet indestructible. After the applause faded, they stood side by side, their hands brushing lightly, not holding, not letting go either. It was a moment so brief, most people missed it. But those who saw it understood the story wasn't about what they had lost. It was about what they had kept: dignity, affection, memory. VI. The weight of memory. As the years passed, their names continued to appear in the same sentences, as if destiny refused to separate them completely. When Keaton published her memoir, then again, she didn't name him directly, but between the lines was a ghost everyone recognized. There are people you meet who become your compass. Even if you never traveled together, they show you where your heart was meant to go. Beatty, when asked in his later years if he regretted anything, gave one of his rare honest answers. "Yes. I regret that I didn't know how to stay." There is something profoundly human about that admission, the awareness that genius often costs the simplest joys. He could win an Oscar, direct an epic, build a legacy, but he couldn't keep the one thing that had made him feel ordinary and alive. For Keaton, the memory remained tender. She never spoke with resentment. She carried his ghost the way one carries a favorite photograph, not to reopen wounds, but to remember that once she had been seen completely. VII. The unspoken farewell. In recent years, as both retreated from the spotlight, a quiet rumor surfaced that Warren had written her a letter after seeing her in book club, a simple note ending with the words, "I am proud of you. Always was." No one knows if she ever replied, but those close to her said she smiled when the subject came up, because perhaps that was enough, not a reunion, not redemption, just acknowledgement. The closure they had denied themselves for 40 years, arriving like a late sunrise. Love, in its truest form, does not always end with togetherness. Sometimes it ends with grace, two people walking away, each carrying a piece of the other's soul. Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton were not a tragedy. They were a lesson that even the briefest connection between two rare spirits can illuminate a lifetime. And when the lights dimmed on Reds, and the applause faded, what remained was not fame, or scandal, or regret, but the quiet certainty that, for a short time, they had touched something infinite. In the quiet rhythm of passing years, what remains is never the applause. It is the silence that follows the space where truth finally breathes. Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton's story was not one of scandal or defeat. It was a mirror held up to the human heart, brilliant, flawed, and afraid. They met as legends, but loved as two fragile people searching for meaning inside the noise of Hollywood. He sought control to hide his fear of impermanence. She sought distance to protect her tenderness from being consumed. And between those two hungers, love bloomed brief, fierce, and unforgettable. Perhaps that is why his confession decades later sounded less like regret and more like gratitude. Because some loves are not meant to be lived, they are meant to be learned from. They are not the ones that last a lifetime, but the ones that change how you understand love itself. Fame gave them everything except time. Time, the cruelest editor of all, cut their story short, leaving behind fragments, a glance unsaid, a letter unsent, a moment of silence that said what words could not. But within those fragments lies something eternal, the knowledge that they once saw each other with absolute clarity. When Diane looks back now, she does not see loss. She sees light. A brief season when art and love became the same language. A moment when two people, standing in the center of the world's stage, found something real enough to haunt them for the rest of their lives. And Warren, in his old age, no longer runs from stillness. He understands that love cannot be edited, perfected, or directed. It must be accepted, even when it slips away. Because in the end, the measure of a great love is not how long it lasted, but how deeply it taught you to feel, to recognize beauty, even in impermanence, to forgive yourself for the things you could not say, to understand that letting go does not erase what was true. Their story reminds us that not every love must end in a home, or a ring, or a promise kept. Some end in a memory luminous, unfinished, immortal in its incompletion. In a world obsessed with happy endings, Beatty and Keaton's love dared to be something else. An unfinished poem, beautiful precisely because it was never complete. So when he said, "Yes, I did love her," it was not confession. It was closure, a final bow to the woman who made him human, and to the truth that even legends are allowed to ache. And perhaps that is the quiet wisdom hidden in their story. That love, like cinema, is not about permanence, but about the light it leaves behind when the reel stops turning.